Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today's episode 49, and I'm here with a special guest. But before we get to that, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, do all the things that you do to keep in touch with the podcast so you can see the next episode. Today, my guest is an established certified life coach and the author of 5 Steps to Freedom from Fear, and the creator of the course, Girl, You've Got This, a guide for women dealing with the emotional fallout from divorce. With a mantra of you get what you settle for, my guest has a foundation built to redefine and reinvent your perspective. I'm glad to share with you Jennifer Maurer. Jennifer, how are you?
Great, Dylan. How are you doing?
I'm doing lovely.
Good. Glad to hear it. It's a fine day we're having.
Absolutely. It's by the time people listen to this, it'll be summer, but it's going to be spring right now. And so it's that time of year where life is kind of blossoming. It's becoming a more beautiful place here in Wisconsin after another savage winter. And that's always a good thing.
It's always a good thing. And I'm right here in Chicago, so I'm right here with you.
Yep.
We know what it's like, those long, hard winters. And
Absolutely.
I surround myself, even in the winter, with flowers in my office, pink and flowers and green and things that remind me of life.
Absolutely. So Jennifer, tell me about you. Tell me how did we end up here talking to you on this podcast? Why do you do what you do? What has happened to you that has brought you here? Tell me all the things and tell me them your way.
Certainly. I wound up here. I think the way a lot of us wind up here is we start off by trying to help ourselves through a difficult situation. And through that is growth. And through that comes a little bit of wisdom. And when you reach that point where you feel as though you're in a good place, I can't speak for everybody, but I think many of us feel the need then to reach out and help others.
Yeah.
Who might have been in that circumstance. And what I find really interesting are the most compassionate people, the people that want to help others the most, are the ones that have gone through the worst.
Yeah.
And the people that I encounter that are, dealing with just various issues, sometimes, they just really do need that second set of ears or eyes to look at the situation. And I just think about what I could have used in a time that was very difficult for me. And I try to be that for other people. So, I had gone through a difficult period in my life about 6 or 7 years ago where, everything that I knew to be true kind of became not true. I was in a marriage that was, crumbling. So my husband and I separated. He moved to a separate state. My daughter was leaving for college, which was good news, of course. But, when your first child leaves for school, it's a little traumatic.
Right.
Then my mother had passed away, who I was very, very close with. And then my son was just entering high school. So all of these things occurred within like a 3-month period. And so, one minute you're married and your kids are at home and your mom is there and everything's okay. And then the next minute, everything's just kind of split up. Some of it we could anticipate. Obviously, knowing college was coming for my daughter was a fun thing to anticipate. And even, with the marriage ending, we kind of saw the writing on the wall there, but there's still that adjustment period. And so, I hate to even say it's traumatic. So many people have suffered so much worse than that in their life. But for me at that stage, it was a very kind of earth-shattering experience. There was a lot of adjustments to be made. And, my primary concern was my 2 children. Even though they were older, they were in high school and college, they were still adapting to these changes within the family and the loss of their grandmother, their loss of the fact that their mother and dad is married, all of these different things. So, I had a pivotal moment where I decided, I can do one of 2 things here. I can feel sorry for myself and curl up, with a bottle of tequila for 2 years, which I'm not saying there wasn't tequila involved a couple of times. But for the most part, you just say, okay, it's time to put the big girl pants on and figure some stuff out, stuff you haven't had to do for a while. I was out of the workforce for almost 20 years, which is a whole different bailiwick now than it was when I left the workforce to raise my kids. And so, I just had to figure it out, and I had to figure it out for my kids, and I had to maintain a certain level of strength for them and make sure they were doing okay. And so, what it came down to was me initially getting a job working for a university as an academics kind of consultant. working with students to figure out what program might be best for them. And, in that became a real coaching opportunity to talk to people about not just, oh, we'll sign you up for this or we'll sign you up for that. It's let's take a look at the rest of your life. What do you feel like you want to be doing? And then it began to turn into much more than what I thought it was going to be in a good way. So I fell in love with that role of kind of guiding people and talking to them about their life and what they want to do. So that's when I decided to move and do a little bit more research about coaching. And then I became a certified life coach. And then through me kind of pulling myself out of this kind of dark era, I started writing things down that worked for me. And there wasn't an easy, quick method that I could find anyway, that kind of gave me some useful tips that I could use like right now. And so I began to write them down. And then I thought, well, if these work for me, they'll probably work for others as well. So that's where 5 Steps to Freedom from Fear came from, because there was an element of fear in that whole period of my life.
Right.
And then eventually, even recently, really kind of started working with a lot of clients who were newly divorced, mostly women, and just kind of understanding what they're going through, not just the fear, but the grief and the, just the whole, what do I do now? How do I reinvent myself? How do I become me again and go out and be productive? So that's where I kind of created the course called Girl, You've Got This, because it really is a kind of a testament to those women and how they can kind of pull themselves across that bridge and get to point A to point B. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
That's a great answer. I love long answers because that means it's well thought out. I'm curious, I certainly don't want you to give away the entire book, but do you mind talking about the 5 steps or your
not
5
at all.
steps? I'd
Not
love to
at
hear
all.
that.
Yeah, that's partly why I'm here, right?
Yeah.
It's to share this information with as many people as possible. And it really, I don't even like to call it a book. It's more of a guide. And the reason I did it, it's about 27 pages and it takes about 15 minutes to read.
Perfect.
And I did that for a reason,
Yeah.
because when I was looking for answers, I didn't have the luxury of reading 300 page books or spending $2,000 on a 6-week course on how to overcome something. It's like, I need answers now.
Right.
And it's really it's not a difficult thing to do. I mean, it requires effort. But basically the 5 steps are comprised of, first of all, defining fear, because fear is something to different people. Everybody has a different definition of it. For me, the best way that I could kind of encapsulate and define fear was as a ruthless thief that creeps into the back of your mind at the height of inspiration and robs you blind. That to me is what fear is. And that's how I define it. So it is important to understand what your definition of fear is. From there, it's identifying what specific fears you have, because it might be one, it might be several, depending on where you are in your life. You may fear different things. So at the moment that you're experiencing a problem with fear, define what that fear is, identify what that fear is or fears, and then take a moment to really evaluate what it's doing to you. What is it preventing you from achieving? What would your life look like without it? What could you have achieved by now, or what could you be working on without it? It's kind of a depressing thought, and these first 2 steps, by the way, they're not easy.
No.
I'm rattling them off, but they're not easy because it really does require you to think and to kind of face those demons and ask yourself, what is this fear? Am I afraid of failing? Am I afraid of success? There is such a thing.
Yep.
For me, it was a fear of letting people down. My particular fear at that moment was I was paralyzed because I was afraid that whatever choice I made was going to be not good enough to get me to where I could take care of my kids or, not disappoint people. That was a big fear of mine. So, but at other times I have had fear of failure and things like that. So identifying it, because you have to know what you're working with before you can overcome it. So those are the first 2 steps. The third one is I think one of the most difficult, but almost one of the most fun, and it's to imagine. And I'm a huge believer that where the mind goes, the body follows. And I think that if we don't like our current reality, then let's go to our happy place and imagine a better one in our mind. That's the one place we can go where it's safe. Nobody can interrupt. Nobody can tell us we're crazy. Nobody can dispute it. But allow yourself that feeling of living without fear. Just imagine it. You don't even have to do it because it's not going to happen overnight. But imagine living a life without fear. And when I say fear, I'm not talking about the fear that's good for us. The fear of putting your hand in the fire. That's a good fear, right? There's fear that serves us well. I'm talking about the irrational fears, the fears that create that dialogue in our brains that tell us why we can't do something. So if you can imagine that fear is not there, and then imagine what your life would look like as a result of making your decisions based on a fearless thought process. And for some people, that's not easy to do. It's always easy for you to say, just don't fear. And if you can't do it, then this is one of the few instances where I believe that you should fake it until you make it. And when I say that, I mean, if you don't think you're there yet where you can do it, then pretend you're somebody that does do that all the time. It could be a role model. It could be a character in a movie that you admire. It could be an old Betty Davis scene. It could be an old boss that you had. It could be a friend, a mentor, somebody who you really respect and think, oh my gosh, man, that person just knows how to walk into a room and own it and just is fearless. What you do is ask yourself in that moment, what would that person do? If I don't have the guts to do this right now, what would so-and-so do? I'm going to pretend to be that person for the next 5 minutes just to get past this deed. I'm afraid to pick up the phone and make the phone call. I'm afraid to walk into that room alone. Whatever it is, it's a little bit of a fake it till you make it. So that's just one of the things I talk about. So that's where the imagine feature comes in, right? So you're using your mind now to kind of offset that negative mindset. Then the next thing to do is to really just kind of create based on having identified fear, defined fear, imagined a life without fear. Now it's time to really kind of create some action steps to go out into the world and do things that will become a habit for you. Doing one tiny little thing a day that scares you goes a long way in helping you to overcome fears, because then you get braver and braver and braver. So that would be the fourth step. And then finally, the fifth step is just simply to reclaim your life. Take everything you've done, the work you've done, the exercises you've done, and just really restake your claim on your own life, because while you're living in fear, your life is not going to be 100% your own. So those are the 5 basic steps.
I love all of them. And I want to touch on the third one when you talked about imagine and that concept of fake it until you make it. It's really interesting when you kind of look at how we've come to understand the science of the imagination as well as how it interacts with the body. And I think you're fundamentally onto it, right? Like, I think this idea of faking it till you make it in this context is remarkably beneficial, because what science of the brain is kind of telling us right now is that the feeling is far more important than the actual reality. And that kind of goes into kind of the work that Peter Levine does and a number of other practitioners, but and it escapes me right now, but oh man, that's gonna bother me. I totally had a brain fart right there.
You'll think of it.
Somatic experiencing, excuse me. Somatic experiencing is that, right? It's not necessarily telling the truth of the situation, but creating if necessary, a fictive situation that creates the feeling that you want. And so I love that you put that in there and you expose that, because that is a concept that's fundamentally important, but I think it's often toted in the wrong context. I think people put that out there and like, you know what, just fake it until you make it. And then people use that in a way of, okay, that means suppress all of my feelings and just get through. It's not the context you want to use it in, right? That's not a
no, absolutely
place.
not. And it is a very overused expression, and it's not always utilized in the correct manner.
Yeah.
And that's why I did say contextually in this particular instance, I do support it, because it works. And when you're at this stage of the game, give me what works, right?
Right.
And here's the interesting element about that, is that once you start doing that, and once you start repeating that, What happens is your persona and your own courage starts to kick in on its own.
Yep.
And like forming a habit, what you'll find is less and less are you pretending to be that other person, and you are really in actuality becoming more yourself. It's just that shift will occur over time. And it, from the beginning of time, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, if you refer to anything having to do with the law of attraction, right? It is, what you feel, your emotions, that is what attracts different things into your reality. It all starts with not what you say, not what you think, not what you believe, but how you feel.
Yeah.
And so whatever you need to do to get to that better feeling place, step by step, the biggest problem I think people have, or the mistake they have, is they think they're going to go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Okay, we're not Maseratis. Like our mindset does not shift. We're not going to believe ourselves if we say I'm going to do this and feel better within 5 minutes. My whole life's going to be well again. We have to be patient with ourselves, and we have to take things in baby steps, and baby steps turn into bigger steps. And if you're willing to have that patience and dig deep, you will find that the results do come and they stay, because fear is always going to be here, right? You might overcome this set of fears, and a year from now, you might have a whole new set of fears based on your circumstance. And so what's good about this formula, are these 5 steps, is they can be applied every time you're faced with that, because we're never going to get rid of fear. I mean, we'd be wearing our rose-colored glasses if we thought we were going to. I'm very careful not to say, get rid of your fears, or, eliminate your fears entirely, because they're always going to be there to some degree. But this is how you kind of combat those situations that come up.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you have the ability to recognize that you're not trying to eliminate something that's impossible. I think a lot of people kind of step into what we do as coaches, or as therapists, or as any person that does any kind of healing or supporting people who are healing. I think some people step into it with that concept, or that almost perfectionism idea, or that residual kind of want to fix people in a manner that is unrealistic. And if you walk into this profession with an unrealistic perspective of what you're trying to do for people, you're going to hurt people. And that,
I was just going to say, you're not doing your clients any service at all.
yeah.
No.
And realistically, you have to create very clear and defined boundaries when you're starting this. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm more speaking to the audience, because this goes for not just people in our positions where we help people, but also the people that you are trying to, in fact, help yourself, right? The people that you might have to coach along the way, your kids, your friends, your parents, into understanding a relationship with you. Willingness is 100% a necessity, right? You can't coach someone, you can't help someone choose something without them being willing to actually choose it. And so a lot of this, whether you're trying to heal right now, or you're trying to help someone else heal, you have to understand that the reality in play is that they must choose. You must choose what you want, or what they want. And you will not persuade them by degrading them, or telling them they're wrong, or, putting them down in any way, or getting upset with them. I promise you, none of that will work. It will only create further problems, or deeper problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the whole thing about coaching, that I think is key is, I mean, it is just what it sounds like. You're not here to tell somebody what to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're not even here to give people advice.
Yeah.
A good coach, in my opinion, helps somebody to come to realizations on their own, because that's the most powerful way to come to it. I mean, you could tell me stuff all day, right? No, okay. But if you ask the right questions, and you get the conversation flowing in the right direction, and you see that light bulb go off, or they go, oh my gosh, I just realized something. That's what's going to stick, and I always tell people, it sounds silly, but I don't want you to have to hire me for life. If I'm a good coach, you're going to fire me at some point. If I'm a good coach, you're going to call me one day and say, I don't need you anymore, but I'm going to refer you to my friend down the street.
Yep.
But my goal is for you to fire me.
Yeah.
My goal is ultimately for you to not need me anymore, because that means I've given you the right tools to move on with your life, to be successful, to get over this, to get over that. And when I've done that, there's enough people out there that need help. I'm not worried about running out of clients,
Yeah.
which is kind of a sad thing. But I do want my clients to feel, that they can very happily leave my side and be self-sustained, because I think if we do anything other than that, then again, we're just not serving the purpose, the higher purpose of being a coach.
100%. 100%. I love that other people share that understanding of this profession, that, you can't just placate your clients and tell them you need me, right? You don't. Like,
No, you
I
just need
promise you,
yourself. You just got to
there's
show them.
all the information that we have found is out there in the ether for you to find as well. Right? Like, I've put together the same information, right? That you feel, that you understand, Jennifer. I've done the same thing, right? And I just do it a different way. That's really it. And it's remarkably similar. And so if we can do it, a lot of people can do it for themselves. And then if they want to do it for others, they can do that. And you find more and more people doing that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, especially if they're hurting, especially if they're in the middle of a crisis, they don't necessarily want to do the research. They don't want to pull all that. I know I didn't want to pull all that information together. What I did was over a period of years.
Yeah.
Then I consolidated it and I put it in one spot. And that's the reason we do it. We offer it to those people that say, well, I could look this up on the internet. I could come to this conclusion. But you know what? I don't have the time, the patience. I'm at my wit's end right now. I just need somebody that's going to help me to get through this, or if it's an e-guide or a book or a course. There's so many different great ways to communicate this type of help, that it just depends on the person and how they best learn and how they want it communicated to them. And thank goodness for it, to be honest. But ultimately, yeah, like you said, we're all doing the same thing. There is no original ideas here.
Yeah.
It's just that we're interpreting it in a way that we think is going to be the most helpful, and then also communicating that. And that is where that's where the magic happens. Because somebody might be listening to me right now, and something I said just really resonates with them. Maybe if it's just one thing, I'm happy I was here today. If in our whole conversation, one person gets one light bulb moment and says, God, that makes so much sense, that might be the thing I was missing. There's going to be other people that don't relate to anything I'm saying at all. They're just not jiving with my way of communication, whereas something you say will. And that's why it is important that there's a lot of people out there doing this, because not everybody's going to like us and not everybody's going to hate us. But clicking with the right people at the right time, that's what you shoot for every day. When I wake up, let me just impact one person today in a positive way that makes them feel like maybe their day or their week or their month can be that much better because of something I've offered.
And if I were to share what I think is most beneficial about your 5 steps, where I think people can benefit the most, it's the first one, right? But on a scale, like it's not just defining fear, it's defining everything, right? I love that you start there, because that's an incredibly powerful place to start, right? If there's anybody out there that's going to take from you, I think if you start there, that's incredibly profound. Because when you can start to define things in general, whether you use the dictionary or not, that's not necessarily important to defining the things that we're talking about here, right? When you define fear, you define the feeling. You defined, this is what it makes me feel. This is what it makes me think. This is what makes me process. These are things, right? And when you can really dial into understanding not only fear, but your values, your principles, your rules of life, your faith, your discipline, all of these things that you maybe don't have, or maybe you are limited by, when you can define those, you can actually start to make decisions a lot faster, and you can start to make decisions that actually matter with more confidence. And I really love that someone else out there that is doing this work started in the same place that I really love to start in.
That's great.
The definition of anything is so profound, in my opinion.
It's where everything starts.
Yeah.
You cannot fix or do anything without knowing what it is.
Absolutely.
And then building upon that. In my particular situation, when I was in that realm of defining it, I became really angry. For me, defining fear for me made me soul search, and then identifying what my fears were and what they were costing me made me angry.
Yeah.
I separated fear as kind of an entity. It's kind of a monster, if you will, a ruthless thief.
Yeah.
I felt like it was robbing me of the things I deserved. And why am I allowing this? Why am I allowing this thief to come in my back door and take everything away from me? As Jack Canfield said, as you know, everything you want is on the other side of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you want. And that resonated with me. And I began to get really angry with fear. And so that, for me personally, was my motivation to figure out a way through this fear channel. And not just now, but in the future, because I was also, you know, enlightened enough to know that fear is going to be back. It's going to pay me a visit again one day. And when it does, I want something that's going to work every time. And so, yeah, that is a very instrumental part in really being able to get to the heart of anything is definition.
Yeah. And I loved it. I just love that that's where you started. And I love where it also ended, and that, that identifying, the imagining, the creation of something, of anything, is incredible, incredibly powerful for humans. And then obviously reclaiming. I'd like to talk about, you get what you settle for.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that come from, and why is it so important to you?
Wow, that's been a mantra I've been living with since I was about 16, I think. And every day I live by it. And, as I was growing up, I had the chance to, I've always been a people watcher, and I've always been an analyzer, an observer of people. I was never an outgoing, popular girl with 19 friends around. I had one or two friends, but I was always the one kind of observing. And, I would often see people that were accepting so much less for themselves than what they should have. Some were family members, some were friends, some were coworkers. And that was always something that it stuck with me as something very unsettling and very upsetting. And, in my life, like everyone, I guess at times, accepted less for myself than what I should have, whether it be in a relationship or a job or pay or whatever it was. And so I had a very good friend of my mother's, actually said to me, well, Jen, if you're not happy with where you're at, you just got to remember, you get what you settle for. You get what you settle for in this life. And she said it so fast, I didn't really think about it, and then, she, I really let it resonate. And it just really, you get what you settle for, empowerment is the message behind that, life happens to you or you happen to life is what I got out of that. And so, I really did, whenever I was in a place in my life where I wasn't happy, who do I have to blame? I blame myself. It's not, my company's fault. It's not, the weather's fault. It's not my bank account's fault. I'm in charge of my life. I make my own decisions. And if you're not happy where you're at, you can self-pity and you can blame the world and everything in it. But that victim mentality wasn't getting me anywhere. It just wasn't. And so I just realized, okay, so, if you want something, if you want to create something, you have to get out and do it, and don't blame anybody else. Don't ask anybody for help. I mean, not to say that you can't get assistance, but I mean, it's ultimately your responsibility. I mean, you're the CEO of your own life. And so I really do try to live by that. And I've taught my kids the same thing, that if you're willing to settle for something, then be quiet about it. Don't complain about it. If you're willing to, if it's below par for you, if in your mind it's not meeting your expectations or it's not as good as you think it could be, then do something about it, because nobody else is going to, so that's kind of where that you get what you settle for came from. And I still think about it every day. I still have to remind myself every day, if I'm complaining about something or not happy about something, you have to turn the accountability back on yourself, because when you rely on the rest of the world, you're going to be disappointed quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it's more of an empowerment, accountability, and really, to me, very enlightening and very optimistic, because there's the implication there that you can always make things better. You can always make things better. It's in your power.
Right. Absolutely. Do you ever feel like there is a limit to using that as a mantra? Do you ever think is there any downside to using that as a mantra?
Any downside? No, because even if it's the external circumstances you can't change in a situation, you always have control over how you perceive it or how you accept it in your mind, how you choose to, and boy, and I know it sounds easy, and I know it's not.
I don't think it sounds easy at all.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's been through anything, oh, I just choose to be happy despite, but no, I mean, the choice to get better, or the choice to heal, or the choice to do something about your present circumstance. And in many cases, it means reaching out to others. It may not even be something you're doing to help yourself. I have found in some of my greatest trying times that I'm able to feel better quickly by reaching out and helping somebody else. And I mean that in a selfish way. I'm not trying to sound like a do-gooder. The more you do for someone else, the better you feel. You don't have to look far to find someone who's got it rougher than you do, or somebody that just needs something, a kind word or something. So I just find that, when I'm in that space, it's very healing for me. And so I feel like that's part of, you get what you settle for. That also means mentally. It means, when you're trying to heal yourself, it doesn't just mean, your goals, like having a good job or a car or, things like that. It's a very personal mantra. I don't see a downside to it. Maybe I should. Do you? Do you know something I don't? I'd love to hear it.
Well, it's hard to. It's certainly a very good mantra, and I wouldn't say there's necessarily a downside, but I think there's threat there. I think there's danger there. I think any mantra has danger to it, because I think the idea of you get what you settle for becomes insatiable in some regards. And so if you always think about everything as, am I settling? And you don't know how to control that answer, right? If you don't put limits on that answer of saying, this is quite good, right?
Mhm.
This is good enough. I think perfectionism can become dangerous. I think
Yeah,
it
that's a
can
good point.
become a very uh, kind of unrestful mantra. And that's I think there's dangers in every mantra that you create, no matter what. And it's really about understanding the limits of it. And that's kind of why I ask. I'm like, I'm curious of, do you see it? Do you understand it? Have you thought about that? But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
And that's an interesting observation. And I think that it is very important for you, again, to define what you want.
Right.
Okay. And if you're in a place where you have what you want, that's where the gratitude comes in,
Mhm.
right? Because on the equal side of that, I'm a huge proponent of gratitude. Just every day, just find something to be grateful for, right? That mantra is more for those moments when you're not satisfied. It's not for moments that you're satisfied and wondering if you should want more, or that you should want more when you're satisfied, because that's not true.
Right.
Everybody has a different threshold of what makes them happy. It could be something very simple. It could be something very complex. And every individual needs to make up for themselves what that is. And if you're happy with where you're at, you're not settling. If you're happy where you're at, you are golden. You're wealthy. You're rich. If you
Mhm.
have achieved that place. This is more for times when you're unsettled, you're not satisfied. You're capable of more. There's more out there and you want more. It doesn't mean you should always be striving for it. It's not a never-ending search for perfection. It's taking stock in where you're at. And if you're there, awesome. And
Yeah.
if you're not there, then get up and do something about it. That's really the main message there.
And I think it's important to kind of put into perspective, this is, I think it's more in terms of what your capabilities are of achieving, of being realistic about that. I
Mhm.
think when you use this in relationships, it can be quite dangerous, especially if you don't understand a realistic relationship.
Oh yeah, don't use the word settle with a
Right.
significant other.
Because and we say that and we laugh about it because
Right.
we understand it. We literally study people
Mhm.
and how they relate to each other. Um, but not everybody does. And so what I really think is, like, when you say you get what you settle for in a relationship setting, what you really are saying is that any issue that pops up in this relationship makes me question whether I should be in this relationship, and that's not beneficial
No, of course
constantly.
not.
You should certainly hash out the expectations within the relationship of saying, okay, we're getting married, and this is what I expect from you. This is what I think is cheating. This is what I think is love. This is what I think is what
Mhm.
we need to do. If you get cancer, I get cancer. This is how we handle it. Is
Mhm.
that something you talk about on a first date? No, but I think somewhere between your first date and the
The
day
wedding.
the day before the wedding,
Right.
you should be having very deep and intricate conversations about things that will
Oh,
undeniably destroy relationships, like
if only. If
cheating,
only. Yeah.
love, finances, all the big things,
All the big things.
so that you are on the same page and you can say, okay, this guy doesn't really understand what I'm trying to achieve. He doesn't
Mhm.
want children, and I very much do want children. That is when you start asking this question. But if you don't know how to be realistic about those expectations,
Yeah.
you got to be really careful with that mantra.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And again, when you using the word settle, um, it doesn't necessarily mean settle in a sense that you're standing still. It's okay, if I find myself, for example, in an abusive relationship, and am I going to continue to allow this in my life, or am I going to separate myself from that? It stretches to that. That's way different than I had a fight with my husband, and so, oh gosh, I feel like I'm just settling now, because no, we're human beings, we're fallible.
Yeah.
Relationships are very complex.
Right.
And if only we had almost a required class. I mean, we have to take a class to get a driver's license, and we have to take a class to enter certain jobs, but we don't have to pass any tests to get married.
Yeah.
And I feel like, that is we could do another whole podcast on that.
Oh, for sure.
Um, but understanding what the elemental differences are in the wants and needs going forward. And here's the other tricky thing, is even if you do that and everything's great and you get married, as you know, as we get older, we change. Sometimes we do change our thoughts and opinions. I mean, fundamentally,
I wouldn't even say sometimes I think everyone
it's
changes
life.
throughout their life,
We evolve.
Yeah.
We
I mean,
evolve.
there's so many different age brackets that, obviously how academics might look at it or the government might look at it. Like, there are so many different transition points through life
Yes.
that you cannot get by without changing. And so
Yeah.
when you get married at 23, you are going to be married to a very different person at 47, no matter who you are. And so if you don't have the capacity to be adaptable as a husband or wife, or to be resilient through that process of changing, of either supporting this person or learning how to delineate, okay, you have changed, and that's acceptable to me, or it's not. And we have to have these discussions. Like, from the couples that I've worked with, it is a remarkably uh, rare thing for people to actually start to have these conversations about, this is what I think about love. This is how I define love. It's so surprising when I ask the question to 18-year-olds or 40-year-olds or
Mhm.
60-year-olds, how do you define love? And they're like, I don't know, man. Like,
Yeah.
I've never thought about that before. I just read it on a Hallmark card and this is what it feels like. Well, you're describing passion or you're describing empathy. You're not actually defining what the action of love really means to you. And so how can you have a good relationship that is supposed to be loving without understanding the actual definition? And that's just one word, right?
Yeah. And it is the end all, question of time,
Yeah.
is how do you define that? And there's languages, there's books written on the languages of love. There's books written on the difference between how maybe men and women view love and are shown and receive love. So it is a highly complex thing. And I wouldn't even touch the word, settle with that. When I refer to you get what you settle for, it's a very personal thing. It's a very
Right.
personal mantra, meant to be, in the place that you're at with what you want out of life in general and whatever. But yeah, it's a tough one when you're in a relationship. And I think that you either grow together or you don't. And sometimes it's not the individual's fault that they're not growing together, because we can't help. Keeping the communication lines open, that is key, because you can accept somebody who is different or somebody who views things differently than you. But if it boils down to, they just don't want the same things out of life. They don't enjoy the same things. There's no compatibility anymore. There's no intimacy anymore. When that stuff goes away, it does become a lot more difficult to kind of salvage that.
Right.
And both people have to ask themselves at that point, where does this go? Where does this lead?
Yeah.
How do we best serve each other and ourselves going forward?
And what's interesting to me is like the generational differences of how we view that process, right?
Mhm.
Of 50 years ago, you talk about divorce and it's remarkably
Oh
like
yeah. No.
grotesque thing, right?
Mhm.
Compared to now where it's commonplace to understand that, but it's also, there's the balance is off, right? 50 years ago, it was certainly far too much
Mhm.
to one side where
Yeah.
there was certainly no freedom
It
for
was
women to
scandalous. Yeah.
say, oh my God, this man's abusive. I want to get out of this relationship. And you couldn't, right? Like
Mhm.
that's certainly too far to that end. And now there's almost too much freedom where people don't want to sit in the pocket of the marriage and say, how can we work on this? It's this guy's a narcissist or she's a narcissist,
Oh,
right?
I hear that word so much. Oh my God.
It's
Talk about another overused word, but
it,
yeah.
and it's not necessarily the wrong term, but I think it's used on a scale of if you show any selfish behavior,
Mhm.
you are narcissistic.
That's what I mean.
And it's just a profound misunderstanding in so many cases. It's not that people are all narcissists, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard that word about every relationship someone's been in. And that's not to say there aren't narcissists out there.
Of course.
What it is saying is that narcissism is very much a spectrum, and only a very small piece of it
Mhm.
is diagnosable
Right.
narcissistic personality disorder compared to
There's narcissistic tendencies or characteristics,
right
but
compared
not, yeah.
compared to the potential for someone to, for a man to focus on work and to serve his family that way is not narcissistic. It's simply it's selflessness in a direction that isn't understood by the rest of the family, right? And so is that a profoundly bad thing? It's not a great thing, but it's not a profoundly bad thing. It's just a thing that we need to address and say, you know, we'll take less money if you give us more time.
Mhm.
And that conversation doesn't happen sometimes. Or on the contrary, um, where the woman is focused on the kids, right? It's a
Mhm.
selfless thing. But if the man can't have a relationship with the wife because she has a relationship with kids,
Yeah.
so intimately, it becomes an issue. And so, when we can't have these conversations, we can't just say this is all narcissism. And so, like, I'm really interested to see in the next couple decades to see where that spectrum kind of comes back into balance. Maybe we'll see.
Boy, you just nailed it. I 100% agree with everything you said and with every analogy that you made, because I think it's 64% of marriages end in divorce. That's the last statistic or percentage I had heard.
What year was that from?
this year.
Wow. Oh my. It
And
used to be 50, right?
yeah, it's up to 64 now. And what does that tell you? It aligns exactly with what you just said.
Yeah.
We're from a we're from a society right now, I think, that is very much wanting instant gratification,
Mhm.
Does not want to put in a lot of effort. The attention spans just aren't there. The patience isn't there. Boy, the pendulum really has swung to the other side. And nothing would make me happier either than to see that balance land in the middle. Let's not run at the first sign of trouble,
Yeah.
but also, let's not put ourselves through, things that, we shouldn't be putting ourselves through either. So
Right.
I think that, you're dead on about that. And I'll be interested to see too. And I think that we need to start teaching our children these, these kind of values, and we need to kind of live by example. I don't know how long it's going to take for that to
Right.
filter down through the generations, but I hope it happens.
Yeah. It's, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing to see that pendulum swing, because people need to learn that, right? And there's so
Yeah.
many good things that have come from that pendulum swing of women actually stepping forward and recognizing what abuse really is, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
the same, I can say the same for men, of like men
Hmm.
stepping forward and being like, well, my wife was a covert narcissist. What is that? Right?
Right.
I mean, there's a reality here where
Yes.
these things are being identified for the first time, where there are real representations of these things, not just saying that narcissism, you can't use that word, but
Hmm.
understanding how to use the word is really important. And saying, my wife is remarkably selfless, but in a selfish way. Or,
Yes.
she is remarkably selfish in general. Like, that is a
Hmm.
possibility too.
Yeah.
And being able to identify these things has become a reality. And now I'm hoping that ability to recognize those things and identify those things. I love your idea of like, there should be a class on marriage before you ever get married.
Honestly,
It's
for real, legit things to talk about.
it's such a stupid, simple idea and concept that could be implemented to help people. Hey, what's love? What does a good relationship kind of look like?
Yeah.
We don't have to sit here and identify, this is what you need to do. It's just simply, this is how you communicate in a relationship. This is what you
Yeah.
can expect in a relationship.
You have to pass the test before you get the license.
Right.
And the other thing too, and I don't know, maybe there wouldn't be nearly as many weddings if this were to happen, but there are certain things, like you said, that are so important to fundamentally agree on. Do you want kids? Yes or no? You don't want to find out after you get married.
Right.
Even if it's, oh, maybe one day, and then, oh, sorry, I really meant I didn't want any after money matters are a
Yeah.
huge thing. Money is one of the leading causes of divorce. And so understanding finances, do you have the one who's the spender and one who's the saver, and it balances out great, or they're going to fight to the end and end up divorced over the finances. So understanding the philosophical fundamental opinions about money
Yeah.
is something that should be talked about too. So I would say, maybe 3 or 4 of those major heavy hitters. Now, you don't have to sit down and haggle everything out, because there is compromise and all of that, but there's some stuff that's pretty big, and
Yeah.
it ends up ultimately causing the demise of the marriage. And especially if there's kids involved,
And,
that's when it gets sad.
and intimacy. I, I
Intimacy.
I've worked with a number of clients that have been through marital rape.
Hmm. Yeah.
That the fact that still exists in 2022 is remarkable.
Yeah.
And not in a good way.
No,
I can't
I could
believe
say that
that
for a few things, but
the
yeah.
yeah, and right, and that's just one example of these heinous and malicious things that are still existent. And I hate to use religion, but religion is a big proponent of it and has been for a very long time. And if we don't understand how to really identify that, like, I'm sorry, I just cannot be on board with someone not having a choice of whether to be intimate or not. And
Under any circumstance, you're absolutely right.
and that absolutely needs to be made. People need to be made aware of that before
Hmm.
they step into a relationship where they just live with that. I mean, that's a remarkably difficult life to live.
It really is. And I think, again, it goes back to what we need to teach our daughters and our sons.
Yeah.
And, I try to, when I address people who are parents, I can't stress enough that whatever growth you're going through, this needs to be transmitted to your children. Kids are a lot smarter than we think they are.
Oh yeah.
They pick up a lot more than non-verbally than we think they do. And so we don't even understand the crystal that we're holding in our hands when a child is present.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it goes back to, from a very early age, instilling in them a sense of self-worth. And, I remember a long time ago when Madonna had her daughter, it was her first child. And everybody said to her, what are you going to teach her about men? What are you going to teach Lourdes about men when she gets to be a teenager? And she looked dead in the guy's eye and she said, I'm going to teach my daughter how to love herself, and I'll never have to teach her a thing about men. And it was just, that's it.
Yeah.
If you give someone a strong sense of self and self-worth, and she's not going to, she'll be able to handle herself in any situation if something were to come up like that. But and that's just one example, but true for little boys and little girls. This is how you deserve to be treated. This is how you should treat others. And if it deviates from that in any way, that's not something you have to accept for yourself. Speak up.
Right.
So it has to start from a very early age, and we have to set the example, I
Yeah.
think.
It's so interesting to work with parents. And what's funny, I actually had a meeting today with a client that she's about to watch her son graduate from high school, right? And I'm about to have a daughter, right? And
Mhm.
so she's asking my advice on and the irony is palpable in this situation where she's asking me advice about how to handle her son leaving the nest in some regards, and help him through life. And honestly, I don't know what my answer is. I don't know what if my answer is the right one. And so I look at this from my own understanding of my own life,
Mhm.
and realizing that my mom relinquished control to me. She gave me the idea of, you have to figure this out on your own, and you should, right?
Mhm.
And you're gonna take the hits, you're gonna get hurt, you're gonna, I can't protect you from everything all the time everywhere. And so you have to allow yourself to function through all of these things, and it's going to be hard. And my mom signed me up for the military at 17. She allowed me to, right? She
Mhm.
wasn't, she didn't really have a choice, right?
Mhm.
When I make up my mind, I make up my mind. And so
She
she
raised you that way.
she recognized, she recognized that I had that desire to do what I want to do. And so she gave me that opportunity, and she relinquished that control. And I think that's a really profound thing for a parent to do,
Yeah.
to look at their child at some point. I think there's a good age range. I don't think you should do that at 10 years old.
No.
I think 16 to 18 is a really good age range for you to look at your child and say, it's up to you
Mhm.
now, right? I'm not
Yeah.
going to control your decisions, but remember that your decisions have consequences here, right? In my house, because it's my house, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I'm going to hold you accountable to them. But that doesn't, if I kick you out of the house, it doesn't mean I don't love you. That just
Mhm.
means you haven't followed the rules, and we had that conversation at my house.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Um,
called accountability, which
yeah,
is, sorry, it's lacking in a lot
yeah,
of people today. And kudos to what your mom did. My mom did the same thing.
yeah,
She was very smart, honest with me, supportive of me, but really said, I'm not doing you any favors, if I try to protect you too much. And I think you can take baby steps with your kids, because with my kids, I kind of did the same thing. I
yeah,
let them know that they were capable of a lot of things, that there was boundaries, there was limits while they were home here. But ultimately, when they grow up, they were free to do whatever they wanted to. Be happy, be smart, get yourself educated, right from wrong. My job's to teach you right from wrong. And that needs to carry you through the rest of your life. But the rest, your career, your mate, whoever you choose, that's all up to you. But at the same time too, I mean, you can do it in baby steps too, even preteen, I would Um, my kids would come to me and say, I can't decide if I want this one or this one, Mom. Which one should I have? At the grocery store or whatever. You can only have one, pick one. Which one should I pick?
Yeah.
I'm not you. I would make them make their own decisions on whether they wanted the apples or the oranges for lunch. Which one should I pick? I don't know what I want. Well, then you better figure it out. Those were little opportunities for me to teach them how to think on their own and make decisions,
Yeah.
even though it was something trivial, but it did, kind of instilled in them that mindset that, and I would say to them, well, you better be careful, because if you don't make decisions, sometimes people will make decisions for you.
Yeah.
And you may not like that. So, and you can make it fun, but those are the important little things that I think that we can do to instill in our kids that they are valued and that they are intelligent and capable, through the tiny little steps.
I want to go back to something you said. You said it's my job to teach my kids right from wrong. And I almost want to challenge you at that.
Well, I know, because that's a very subjective thing. I know my
Right.
idea of what's right and wrong.
Right.
I'm just talking about fundamentally, and be kind, how to treat people, manners, things like that.
Maybe it's more of, I want to teach you how to develop an understanding of right and wrong.
Oh, that's even better. I like that better.
Because
that it really is what I mean.
Realistically, like we can't teach children our version of right and wrong, because eventually they'll look at us and be like, you taught me this and now it's wrong. Because at this point in our lives, technology is so fast. It's moving so quickly.
It is.
What we teach now as right and wrong is going to be there's
people now that think technology is wrong.
Right, exactly.
There's people that will tell you technology is wrong right now.
It's everything is changing so quickly that we're learning so much at such a scale that I don't think it can be our job to teach what's right and wrong. And so we have to develop a system, within our child to understand how to develop, okay, this is right now, and you might have to adapt this. You might have to change this because, social media changes, or the systematic view of culture changes, or life changes, right? Like you lose me, or you lose your mom, or you lose your dad, you lose your friend, you lose people, and life changes. And I really like the idea of relinquishing control of the conceptualizations of right and wrong to children, and then talking about it with them, and giving them an opportunity to help us learn what's right and wrong for them, so that we can actually have informed decisions for them, or we can actually make informed decisions for them. Like my kid's 10 years old, and I look at him and I'm like, tell me what's going on. Right. Okay. And now what do you think if we were to conduct this discipline for what you've done, what would you think of that? And he says, I think that's fair. And I'm like, are you sure? I want to be very clear about this. Like, do you think it's fair? And then we have these conversations throughout, throughout the process of what we're going through. And he, in many ways, has a decision in the process. He has buy-in in some way.
He has a stake in it. He's owning it.
And I think that's right. Do I know if it's right?
None of us do. We're parents. They don't come with. None of them come with instruction manuals, and I never preach, because I could very well be wrong about a lot of things myself.
Right.
For me,
could I.
Yeah. I mean, we all could. Let's face it. Nobody's gotten it perfect. But we do the best we can. Is what we do. And I think what was important for me was to kind of instill a sense of morality, or maybe a moral compass of some sort with my kids, because like you said, most of life, believe me, I get reminded every day. I have a 23-year-old and a 25-year-old. So I'm reminded every day of how the culture is way different from the culture from when I was their age. They verbally remind me, I can see it just in the verbiage and how, and they're great kids, by the way. I'm the luckiest parent in the world. They really have never given me any problems. But just that cultural difference is so funny, and how they communicate amongst each other, and how the social media thing has come into such play. And, oh gosh, I'm going to sound like those old, back in my day, it was this or that. And I stop myself from saying it because I'm not going to be that person.
Yep.
And then there's people older than me that are really flipping out over this whole generation.
Yep.
So I'm trying to stay young and stay focused and stay knowledgeable and educated, because just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where your point comes into play.
Yep.
Whose version of right or wrong, especially when it comes to cultural type of things. And
Yeah,
it's an interesting game to play. It's like a crapshoot is what it is.
I think the next 10 to 20 years of culture and legality, right? Like the legal system in which we function in, and culture in general is going to be really, I think there's going to be a pretty massive upheaval, because I think those people that have lived without technology are slowly dying, right? And that's only going to speed up as we get older. And the more those people are gone, because obviously you can look at Congress and you can look at the Senate and see the age of people that are running the country.
Yeah,
that's going to change, right?
Yeah.
These people that have this vision for what America should be at that age are not going to be there forever, right? Even if there's no term limits, they're eventually going to die. And I think culturally we're going to see a pretty big shift. Economically, obviously, we're seeing that shift. But I just think a lot of things are going to change. And I hope for the best. I hope freedom of speech remains how it is, because I think that's so fundamentally important for people, regardless of whether we hear the people that probably shouldn't have a voice, versus the people that certainly should have a voice. I think both are necessary. It's hard to say that, right? It's hard to say like Nazis.
No, I agree though.
Voice, but
that's the whole purpose for it.
I think the benefit to having bad people have a voice is that you see that bad people can exist.
Yeah, you have to have the contrast.
And
it's like anything. You can't have happiness without sadness.
Right. And you clarify, right, your position in juxtaposition to that of saying,
absolutely,
I can't agree with that, right? But you can't say you can't have a voice, because then where does that line stop? It's a really hard thing to say no one should have a voice or someone shouldn't have a voice and these people should. Because
that's scary.
It is. It becomes
that's
really
when you get
scary.
into the scary territory. And that's the whole reason this country was set up with that foundation.
Yeah.
You hate to see somebody burning a flag. I want to throttle them, but they have a right to do it. That's when your belief in the freedom is tested to the max, is when someone that you would go to great lengths to make sure never happens, yet allow it to happen, because that is part of what makes us free. And boy, don't even get me started on all that, because because that is when you do get into scary territory, when who starts selecting who's right and who's wrong. And it goes back to your thing again. That's a very subjective question. And if the wrong person is saying something's right, then that's where the trouble starts and doesn't end. We have to be very careful that doesn't happen. And it does concern me sometimes when I see the media outlets and who they're controlled by and what type of dialogue is being heard. And there's a big difference between listening to the BBC News or an international news station and listening to a US station. So that's a whole other bailiwick, but there's concern there that needs to get balanced out, like you said.
We'll see how it turns out. But
I hope our younger generation takes charge of this thing. And
I think at some point there's going to be some realizations made by all generations of understanding how intricately important freedom of speech has been, especially in the last 20 years with social media, right? There's been censorship, there's been difficulties in there, but I think overall what we're seeing is a generation that has taken freedom of speech to a level that we've never been able to before. Social media, as many people want to look at it as such a negative thing, and I think they're absolutely right. They also don't like to point out the fact that that social media has also created this dynamic in the country that allows freedom of speech on a scale never seen before.
Absolutely.
And
There's good and bad to everything.
yeah,
You could say that about the internet as well. Look at all the crap on the internet, right?
right.
But look at how quickly we can communicate information
Yeah,
to one another. I mean, it's like anything else out there. Cell phones, same thing. The kids are on the cell phones way too much. Yeah. But as a parent, I was thrilled that my teenagers were out with cell phones, because then I could always make sure that they were okay. We live in a different world.
yeah,
It's much more polarized now.
yeah,
And the fact that I, could pick up my phone and make sure that my daughter was okay. And, that was huge for me.
yeah,
But yeah, when you sit and play on the phone for 9 hours a day as well, there's issues with that. So
right.
it's like everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jennifer, I feel like we could probably talk about all the things for a
Mhm.
couple hours, but I think we should call it here. We should see what you say to the final question that I ask everybody, and hear your response. So I'm going to ask you, if there was one message you could leave the world, what would it be?
One message that I could leave the world is that we are all unique beings. There is not anyone on the planet like you, just like a fingerprint. And to worship that, cultivate that, love that, and be the best that you can absolutely be. That's when you can serve others. But to also understand that even though we are individuals and we are amazing individual creatures, we are all very much alike. We are much more the same than we are different. And so if we
Absolutely.
could just remember that when we're dealing with our fellow humans, if we did those two things, I think it would be a very different world.
Yeah.
That's what I strive to do.
Well, Jennifer, it's been a pleasure having these conversations, and it's good to hear your point of view and your perspective. It's been wonderful. I love what you've done with your book, and I have no doubt that everything you do from here on out is going to be just as well defined and good natured, and I love that. What's the best way for people to kind of get in touch with you and follow down the track of learning from you?
I think the easiest way is just to visit my website. It's just jennifermauer.net. I designed the website so everything's accessible on there. My social media links, the information on my projects I work on. I have a kind of an inspirational corner with some of my favorite quotes and memes and things, and a newsletter. I just wanted to make it kind of a fun stop for people to kind of buzz in there and get a little inspiration. And if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the stuff I've done, you can certainly find it in there as well. So yeah, thanks for asking. That's the best and easiest way to reach me.
Perfect. Jennifer, thank you. For those of you who are still watching and listening, thank you. And we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience.
Thank you, Dylan, and thanks to your listeners.